You're what? My mother's voice cracked like a dish hitting tile. She stood frozen at the edge of the kitchen, her hands still dusted with flour from the cinnamon loaf she had been kneading just moments before. The smell of nutmeg and vanilla still hung in the air, clashing violently with the panic now rising in her throat. "I'm pregnant," I said again, quieter this time, as if volume could soften the blow. I held the test in my hand, two bold pink lines staring back like they were screaming. My chest tightened. I had rehearsed this moment, thought maybe I could explain it gently, walk them through it. But there was no easing into something like this. Not in the Whitmore household. Not with parents like Gregory and Linda. A chair scraped hard against the wood floor behind me. My father stormed in from the living room, the newspaper still crumpled in one hand. His face was already red. "Say that again." I didn't. He didn't wait. "You're pregnant?" "Jesus, Nora." His voice didn't even shake. It thundered. "What the hell were you thinking?" My mother gasped behind me, her hand flying to her mouth. She turned away as if my words were something filthy she couldn't look at. "How could you do this to us?" she whispered, and then louder, shrill now. "Do you have any idea what people will say?" "I didn't mean," I began, but my father's fist slammed the table. "Shut your mouth. You've shamed us. After everything we've given you, this is how you repay us." I could feel the walls of that neat little kitchen closing in. My breath was shallow. I looked at them, these people who had raised me, lectured me on morality and obedience, who preached about keeping up appearances, and I realized in that moment I didn't belong here anymore. "If you think we're going to help you raise someone else's mistake, think again," my father snapped, pushing his chair back so hard it nearly toppled. "You made your bed, Nora. Now lie in it. Get out." I stared at him, stunned. "You're kicking me out? Just like that?" "You are not my daughter," he said, each word landing like a blade. "Not right now. Not anymore." The floor beneath me didn't shake, but it might as well have. I didn't scream. I didn't plead. I just turned and walked upstairs, my ears ringing with silence and shame. I met Brady Carter when I was 16. He had the kind of smile that could light up a hallway, the kind of voice that made you lean in closer, even when you didn't need to. He played midfield for the varsity soccer team. But what made me fall for him wasn't his game. It was the way he listened, really listened, when I talked about my dreams. I told him I wanted to write novels. He told me he wanted to travel, to build something that mattered. We made promises between classes, scribbled our dreams in notebooks, and whispered about running away to Columbus after graduation, renting a crappy apartment and figuring it all out together. It felt unstoppable, like the kind of love that only burns that bright when you're too young to know better. Then came senior year. Then came college applications. And suddenly Brady had no time. The text slowed, the calls stopped. When we did meet, he talked only about Georgetown and Stanford, about his future. Never ours. Then, one chilly October afternoon, we were walking through the park near my house, leaves crackling under our sneakers, when he stopped mid-step. "Nora," he said, hands in his jacket pockets, "we need to talk." I already knew. My stomach twisted. He couldn't even look me in the eye. "It's just this isn't working anymore," he said. "I have plans, big ones. And this," he gestured vaguely between us, "it's holding me back." I opened my mouth to argue, to remind him of everything we'd said, all we'd planned. But when I met his eyes, they were already gone. "I'm sorry," he said, and that was it. He walked away without turning back. The wind picked up. My scarf slipped from my neck, but I didn't feel the cold. I just stood there in the dying light, arms wrapped around myself like it could hold me together. A week later, I was in the bathroom staring at the test in my shaking hands. And just like that, all the plans we'd made were gone. All the love, the laughter, the late-night phone calls gone. All that was left was me and two pink lines, and the sinking certainty that I was now completely, devastatingly alone. I packed in silence. There wasn't much to take. A few shirts, a worn-out hoodie, my old journal with the frayed edges and dried-out pen still clipped to the front. I stuffed them all into my duffel, careful not to cry too loud, even though there was no one left to hide my tears from. Downstairs, I could hear the low murmur of my parents' voices, tense, clipped, like they were talking about a stranger who'd just committed a crime inside their home. That stranger was me. The hallway outside my bedroom looked different that night. Colder, dimmer, like even the light bulbs were ashamed of me. I paused outside my door one last time, hand brushing the frame like it could give me strength. That's when I saw it, the family photo from 2 Christmases ago. Me, standing between my parents, all of us wearing matching red sweaters. I stared at it for a moment, then turned the frame face down and walked away. No one stopped me at the front door. No one even looked up when it clicked shut behind me. The October air bit at my skin. The street was quiet, just the occasional rustle of wind in the trees. I walked down the front steps, my breath fogging in the cold. It was almost midnight, and I had nowhere to go. Brady hadn't replied to a single message since the breakup. I'd texted him after the test, after the fight with my parents, after I got thrown out. Nothing. It was like he'd evaporated. I stood there on the sidewalk, duffel strap biting into my shoulder, trying not to panic. I had no plan, no money, no home, no idea what would happen in the next hour, let alone tomorrow. But I had one name in my head, Grandma Ruth. She wasn't close with my parents. After Grandpa died, she moved out to the edge of Maple Hollow, bought a rundown brick house, and mostly kept to herself. The last time I saw her was Christmas morning 2 years ago. She had brought homemade cranberry muffins and laughed too loud during dinner. I remember her squeezing my hand before she left and whispering, "If the world ever turns on you, baby girl, come find me. I've still got some fight left." I prayed she meant it. I walked to the gas station 2 miles away, used the payphone, and scraped together enough courage to dial her number. She picked up after 2 rings. Ruth speaking. My throat clenched. "Grandma, it's Nora." A pause. Not even a second. "You need a ride?" She met me at the bus depot an hour later. Her truck rumbled into the lot, headlights cutting through the cold. She stepped out in a thick knit cardigan and boots that had clearly seen better days. When she saw me, she didn't ask questions. She just wrapped me up in her arms and whispered, "You're safe now. You hear me? Safe." I cried so hard I couldn't speak. Her house was small and drafty, but it smelled like cinnamon and chamomile and something that felt like home. She made me tea, pushed a plate of cold meatloaf in front of me, and sat beside me without a single word of judgment. That night, I lay on her couch, a crocheted blanket pulled up to my chin, listening to the wind batter the windows. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't stop. Shame pulsed through every thought. I'd ruined everything, thrown away my future. And yet, as the old house creaked and my grandmother softly hummed down the hall, a strange thought crept in. Maybe this was where the real story began. Maybe being cut off wasn't the end. It was the start of something no one, not even me, could see yet. The next morning, I woke to the smell of bacon and eggs. Ruth was already up, fussing in the kitchen like she had a full diner to serve. She looked over her shoulder and grinned. "Sleep okay?" I nodded, still unsure how to exist in a place where no one was shouting. She poured coffee into a chipped mug and slid it toward me. "We'll figure this out, you and me," she said matter-of-factly. "Won't be easy, but Whitmore women don't break. We bend, and then we bounce back." I didn't say anything, but in my chest something shifted. A crack of light, a beginning. The days blurred into one another. Ruth's little house on the edge of Maple Hollow became a kind of sanctuary, not because it was quiet, but because it held no expectations, no judgment, no slamming doors or whispered disgrace. Just soft slippers on creaking floorboards and the distant hum of her radio, tuned to late-night jazz. She let me sleep in, let me cry, let me wander from room to room like a ghost, learning how to live again. And when the nausea came, the morning sickness, the fatigue, the moments of panic that gripped my chest when I remembered I was only 17 and already carrying a child, she never flinched. "I raised your daddy with less than this," she'd say with a raspy laugh, passing me ginger tea and a plate of dry toast. And he turned out all right mostly. I tried to believe her. On good days I did. By the time my belly began to show, the fear had morphed into something heavier. Not panic anymore, just weight. Literal and emotional. I spent long afternoons sitting on the porch swing, staring out at her frostbitten rose bushes, wondering what kind of mother I was about to become. Would my child hate me for bringing them into the world like this? Would I be enough? Ruth never let those thoughts linger for long. "You got out," she said one night as we folded laundry on the couch. "You walked out of that house with nothing but your name and your baby. That's not weakness, Nora. That's power most people never find." I folded a onesie slowly, trying not to cry. It was in that tiny, cluttered house that I began to rebuild, not in grand gestures, but in little things. I got a job waitressing at a local cafe, Mabel's, a squat brick diner at the corner of Elm and Third. It wasn't glamorous. It barely paid, but it was something. A place to be useful. A way to scrape together a future 1-nickel tip at a time. Ruth gave me rides when I was too nauseous to walk, packed me leftover pot roast in Tupperware, and stayed up late reading baby books aloud in her crackling voice like it was scripture. We didn't talk about my parents. Not really. Every so often she'd mention them, in clipped, bitter tones, and I'd flinch, but she never pushed. She knew better than anyone what kind of man my father was, what kind of silence my mother had chosen. I was 6 months along when we picked out the name. We were sitting in the garden, bundling dried lavender into sachets to hang in the closets, when Ruth looked at me and said, "What about Micah?" The name hit me like a gentle gust of wind. "Micah," I repeated. "It's soft." "It's strong," she corrected. I smiled. He came in the middle of August, on a Tuesday morning so hot and thick it felt like the air itself was sweating. I was rinsing dishes in the kitchen sink when the first contraction hit. Sharp and low and unmistakable. I doubled over, hands gripping the edge of the counter. "Grandma!" Ruth burst through the back door in seconds, tossing her gardening gloves aside, keys already in hand. "Let's go, girl," she said, guiding me toward the truck. "This little man's on his way." The birth was long and hard and messy, just like every truth worth holding. But when they placed him on my chest, warm and wet and crying with a voice that already demanded the world take notice, I forgot every minute of the pain. "You're my joy," I whispered, brushing a finger down his cheek. "My secret." Micah, tiny fists clenched, eyes blinking up at me like he knew exactly who I was. Across the room, Ruth stood with her arms crossed and her face softening into a smile that almost cracked open the sky. "Well," she said gruffly, "he's got a head full of hair and a scream that could wake the dead. Definitely one of us." I laughed, a real laugh, shaky and broken and real. And in that small, sterile hospital room, with the hum of machines and the scent of antiseptic, I understood something I hadn't before. I wasn't just a girl who'd been cast out. I was a mother now, and that meant I had something to fight for, something no one could ever take from me again. Raising a child on waitress wages isn't romantic. It's survival. It's math that never quite adds up. Gas money or diapers, electric bill or formula. It's clipping coupons at midnight and praying your kid never realizes how close the line is between barely enough and nothing at all. Micah never knew. Not really. He thought grilled cheese sandwiches and second-hand picture books were the stuff of kings. He thought Ruth's garden was a jungle, and the creaky porch swing was a rocket ship. He never saw the way my hands blistered from washing dishes at Mabel's, or how I cried in the walk-in freezer, because tips were short that week. He just saw love, and God help me, I gave it to him with everything I had. Mabel's Cafe was no one's dream. It had a broken neon sign, sticky menus, and a cook named Vern who smoked behind the dumpster and cursed like it was a second language. But it was mine, a place I could show up to 6 days a week, pull on an apron, and build something not grand but solid, steady, real. The customers were regulars, farmers, retirees, tired truckers passing through. They liked me well enough, called me kiddo, handed me folded up bills, slipped extra quarters into the tip jar when they thought I wasn't looking. But no one ever looked at me like I was more than the girl behind the counter, until the day I spilled coffee on a stranger in a suit that probably cost more than my rent. I remember it like a punchline to a joke I didn't know I was part of. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon, summer. Heat pressed through the windows like a second skin. The diner was quiet, just the hiss of the fryer and a fan trying its best. I was rushing with 2 pots of coffee when my foot caught on the corner of a chair. The pot jerked. Hot liquid arced through the air and landed squarely in the lap of a man reading the Wall Street Journal. Gasps. A dropped fork. Then silence. "Oh my God!" I stammered, grabbing napkins, my heart punching against my ribs. "I'm so sorry, sir, I didn't." He looked up. Sharp jawline, silvering hair, a suit too crisp for Maple Hollow. And then the impossible, he laughed. Like really laughed. Deep and unbothered, like someone who didn't just get drenched in diner-grade coffee. "It's all right," he said, waving off my frantic dabbing. I needed a reason to replace this suit anyway. I stared at him, dumbfounded. He offered his hand. Derek Vaughn. I didn't take it right away. I wasn't used to men like him. Men who didn't flinch at my baby bump, didn't glance at my left hand for a ring that wasn't there, didn't carry pity behind politeness. That day he tipped me $20 and said, "Next time I'll wear darker colors." I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. He came back the next day, and the next week. Always in suits, always with a smile, always sitting in my section. He asked about the specials, about the town, about me, never in a way that felt like prying, just curious, present. One afternoon, he caught me watching Micah through the window as Ruth walked him home from preschool. I was wiping down the counter, distracted by the sight of his tiny backpack bouncing with each step. "Your son?" Derek asked. I nodded, wary. "He's lucky," he said. "Most kids don't grow up knowing they're somebody's entire universe." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. Over the weeks, he brought small things, a box of crayons for Micah, a dog-eared book of astronomy facts, daisies from the farmer's market wrapped in brown paper. I told myself not to get attached, but men like Derek didn't waltz into lives like mine without a reason. So I waited for the catch, the motive, the mask to slip. It never did. Instead, he listened. He laughed at my sarcasm, remembered my favorite pie flavor, never once made me feel like I was less for being young, poor, or mother without a ring. And one night, as we sat outside the diner beneath the flickering porch light, he looked at me, really looked, and said, "I don't want to save you, Nora. I just want to be where you are." The words hit harder than they should have, because no one had ever said that to me. Not my parents, not Brady, just this man with coffee-stained trousers and eyes that didn't flinch when they looked at my past. In that moment, something cracked open in me. Something big, something dangerous. Hope. The proposal didn't come with roses or violins or a sparkly ring hidden in a dessert. It came with rain. We were sitting on the front porch of Ruth's house, watching the thunder roll in over Maple Hollow, the sky bruised purple and slate. Micah was inside, curled on the couch with a book about sea creatures, his feet kicking against the armrest in that way he always did when he was deep in thought. Derek sat beside me, a blanket over both our laps, the scent of petrichor rising from the earth like something ancient and alive. He hadn't said much that evening, just held my hand quietly, his thumb brushing the back of mine like it meant something. Not flashy, not performative, just steady. "Nora," he said, his voice barely louder than the wind. "Marry me." I blinked, laughed a little, not because it was funny, but because I didn't know how else to hold the weight of those two words. You serious? I asked, turning to look at him. He nodded. I'm not offering rescue or reinvention. I'm just asking if you'll let me stay. In the mess, in the quiet, in all of it. No ring, no grand gesture, just the truth, raw and warm in his eyes. And that's what undid me, because after all these years of being left behind, by Brady, by my parents, by the people who looked at me and only saw mistake, here was someone offering presence, not escape. I have a son, I said quietly. I have a past, and I don't trust easy. I know, he said, and I'm still here. We married in Ruth's backyard under a string of fairy lights and a canopy of rustling trees. Micah wore a little suit and carried a bouquet of wildflowers down the aisle. Ruth cried and cursed in the same breath and baked 3 pies instead of a cake because no one trusts a cake that pretty anyway. It wasn't fancy. It was ours. After the ceremony, Derek pulled me aside and handed me a thick envelope. I frowned, confused, and opened it. Inside a check, a number so large my breath caught. Derek? I know you've been saving for Micah's college since the day he was born, he said gently. This is to match it, not to take over, just to walk beside you like I promised. Tears burned behind my eyes. 15 years of tips, spare change, and sacrifice, and here was someone matching it not to impress, but to believe in a dream I hadn't dared say out loud. That night, while Micah was asleep and Ruth was snoring in the recliner, I pulled out every dollar I'd ever tucked away, every faded bill, every rolled-up coin, and went into town the next morning. I ordered a jacket, not for me, for him. It was deep navy wool, sharp and fitted like the suits he wore, but with a soft corduroy collar, a nod to that first day in the diner when I ruined his expensive one. Inside the lining, stitched by hand, I asked the tailor to sew a single phrase, "Thank you for staying." Time passed. Micah grew. Fast. Too fast. He aced science competitions, stayed up late sketching circuits and constellations, asked questions I could barely keep up with. By 12, he was building solar-powered fans out of scrap. By 16, he had a framed scholarship letter hanging over his bed. He didn't just carry potential. He radiated it. When he got accepted into Johns Hopkins for pre-med, I wept on the porch swing where Derek had proposed, the same one that creaked every time Ruth dropped into it with a mug of tea and a story about the old days. You did this, she said, patting my knee. All those years you thought you were drowning. You were building a boat. Then came the graduation. Top of his class. Golden stole. That same quiet smile he'd had as a baby, full of wonder and just a little bit of mischief. He hugged me tight after the ceremony, his voice low in my ear. I hope I make you proud. I pulled back, cupped his face, and said, You were my reason before you ever earned a grade. We thought the past was buried. We thought we had outrun it. But the past has a way of showing up at your door when you least expect it. And for us, it arrived in the form of a man in a hospital gown, a patient, a stranger, with my son's eyes and my father's voice. It started like any other phone call. I was folding laundry in the living room, the hum of the dryer mixing with the low murmur of a cooking show Ruth had left on in the background. The sun streamed in through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the floorboards, and for once, everything felt still, peaceful. Then the phone rang. I answered without looking at the caller ID, still smoothing out a t-shirt. Hello. Mrs. Vaughn. The voice was male, polite, measured. Not Derek, not Micah. This is she. I'm calling from St. Andrew's Clinic. Your son, Dr. Micah Vaughn, asked me to pass along a message. He had a patient today, and the gentleman would like to speak with you. Personally. My spine straightened. Why? The nurse hesitated. He said he believes he knows you, that you're family. My stomach turned. I hung up without another word. Micah called later that night. His voice was quiet. Careful. Mom, do you know a Gregory Whitmore? The name hit me, like a backhand across the face. I hadn't heard it spoken aloud in over 20 years. Not since the night he told me I was no longer his daughter. Not since he threw me into the cold with nothing but a duffel bag and a broken heart. I sat down slowly, gripping the phone like it might shatter. He's my father. There was a pause. He's my patient. I closed my eyes. Of course he was. The universe didn't forget. It waited. It turned, slowly, deliberately, until its hands pointed back at you. What does he want? Micah exhaled. He didn't recognize my name at first. Just said he was curious about the doctor who fixed his shoulder. Then he asked about my mom, where I was from, what kind of woman raised a surgeon. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Now he wants to know. Micah's voice shifted, firmer, protective. I told him he doesn't get to want anything, but he begged, said he needed to see you, said he made mistakes. Mistakes, I whispered, staring at the walls of the life I'd built, every inch paid for with tears and grit. Is that what he's calling them now? Micah was quiet for a beat, then said something I hadn't expected. I'll bring him, if you say yes. And even more unexpected, I said, okay. The day they arrived, the wind had a bite to it. Autumn again, same as the season they threw me out. The trees lining our street in Maple Hollow were turning gold, their leaves whispering down like tiny confessions. I stood on the front porch, watching their car pull in. Derek stood behind me, silent but steady, his presence a wall at my back. Ruth was inside, slicing apples for a pie she insisted was just coincidence, though we all knew better. Micah stepped out first, tall and sure, his white coat traded for a flannel and jeans. Then he opened the passenger door. Gregory Whitmore emerged slowly. He looked older, of course, thinner, grayer, leaning slightly to one side, but his eyes were the same. Cold, calculating, sharp with guilt he hadn't figured out how to carry. Next to him was Linda, my mother. Her eyes were red, her face pale and puffy. She looked like someone who had finally realized the price of silence. I didn't move. Micah walked up the steps, his voice low. You okay? I nodded too quickly. Fine. Everything's fine. But my hands were shaking. I turned toward them. My parents. The ghosts of my old life. They looked at me like I was something unfamiliar, not foreign, just unreachable. Nora, my mother said softly, you look so strong. I said nothing. Gregory tried to smile. It didn't reach his eyes. We just wanted to say, Micah stepped between us. Let me introduce you properly, he said, his voice hardening. This is my mother, Nora Whitmore Vaughn. She raised me. She fought for me. And she made me who I am. This, he gestured around him, this is her world. You don't walk into it unless she opens the door. They looked stunned. Good. I tilted my head, measured them for a long moment, then finally spoke. If you're here for redemption, I said slowly, you are 20 years late. But if you're here to acknowledge what you did, to own it fully, then maybe, just maybe, I'll let you sit down for tea. Linda began to cry. Gregory looked like the wind had been knocked out of him. Micah didn't look at either of them. He only looked at me. And in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. Blood may tie people together. But loyalty? Loyalty is earned. We sat in the living room, for people who used to be a family. The tea Ruth had made was still steaming, untouched. The scent of cinnamon and apple lingered in the air, but no one reached for their cup. Micah sat beside me on the couch, his hand loosely resting on my shoulder. Derek stood by the window, arms crossed, his gaze unwavering as he observed everything like a man watching a negotiation with stakes too high for comfort. Ruth, bless her, stayed in the kitchen, slicing fruit like she didn't hear every word through the thin walls of the house she'd fought to keep warm all these years. Gregory and Linda sat perched on the edge of the love seat like the cushions might reject them. Neither one of them spoke at first. I let the silence stretch. I'd waited 20 years for this moment, they could wait a few minutes longer. My father was the one to finally break. Nora, I came to say I was wrong. About everything. We both were. His voice was lower than I remembered, raspier, as if guilt had frayed it at the edges. I stared at the steam rising from his tea, curling like smoke from a fire long put out. You didn't just make a mistake, he continued. You made a life. You made a son. And from what I see, you've raised him into a man any father would be proud of. Linda nodded silently beside him, eyes damp, fingers knotted together like prayer. I didn't answer right away. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I looked at them the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray, analyzing the fracture lines, wondering if what's broken is even worth fixing. Micah is everything I never thought I deserved, I said slowly, my voice even. He's brilliant. He's kind. And he's the only reason I'm even listening to this. My mother opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. You don't get to rewrite what happened. You don't get to call it a misunderstanding or a lapse in judgment. You abandoned me when I was 17 and pregnant. You left me with nothing but a duffel bag and the echo of a slammed door. You didn't just break my heart, you buried me. And now you're here, 20 years later, asking to share a table you tried to burn down. Linda sniffled, her voice barely above a whisper. We didn't know how to fix it. We didn't know how to reach you. I tilted my head, the anger cold in my chest, not blazing anymore, just steady. You didn't try. You knew where Ruth lived. You knew where I worked. You just didn't want to look bad to your friends in town. You chose your pride over your daughter. And now you want your grandson to look at you like you're something other than strangers. Gregory looked away, shame finally catching up to him. I was scared. I didn't know how to handle it. I thought I was doing what was right, teaching you a lesson. I laughed then, a bitter sound that cracked through the room. You taught me a lesson, all right. You taught me that love has limits, that home isn't a place you can count on, that the people who are supposed to protect you might be the ones who throw you to the wolves. I took a deep breath, let the silence settle again, and then leaned forward. But here's what you don't get. I didn't just survive what you did to me. I built a life from it, a damn good one, with a husband who respects me, with a son who knows what unconditional love actually feels like, with a family who chose me. And I am not going to let you walk in here and poison that with regret, dressed up as reconciliation. Micah looked at me, eyes wide but proud. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. This was my reckoning, my moment, my choice. I finally turned to him. Do you want to get to know them? I asked softly. He paused, looked between me and the people who once left me for dead. I want to know the whole story, he said, but I already know who my family is. Then he reached over and took my hand again, and for the first time in 2 decades, the weight on my chest eased just enough for me to breathe. I stood. You may stay for tea. You may ask questions, but you don't get to rewrite history. Not in this house. They both nodded, subdued. Derek finally uncrossed his arms and moved toward me. You okay? He murmured. I nodded. I'm better than I've ever been. Outside, the wind rustled the marigolds in Ruth's garden, carrying the sound of peace hard-earned. The rest of the visit unfolded like a truce in a war. No one had really one. My parents stayed for tea. They asked questions, soft, cautious ones, about Micah's childhood, about his schooling, his favorite books. I let them. I answered when I felt like it, deflected when I didn't. There were long silences between sentences, but no one filled them with fake warmth or second-hand apologies. Ruth didn't join us, but I caught her peeking in once from the kitchen door, eyes narrowed like a hawk watching wolves near her den. Derek stayed seated close, not possessive, but protective in the quiet, grounded way only he knew how to be. At one point, Linda pulled a folded envelope from her purse. These are some photos of you when you were little. I thought you might want them. I took it, placed it on the coffee table, and didn't open it. I wasn't ready to look at a girl who still thought love was permanent just because it shared her last name. Gregory tried again later to offer some explanation, some diluted version of accountability. We didn't know how to handle it, Nora. You were always our pride, our perfect girl. And when you came home with news we didn't know how to face, we failed. I failed. I didn't interrupt. I just looked at him, really looked, and said, "You didn't fail because you made a mistake. You failed because you left me to pay for it alone." When they finally stood to leave, Linda hesitated at the door. "Do you think we could see you again? Maybe talk more next time?" I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I simply held the door open and replied, "That depends on whether you're coming back for me or for your own guilt." She nodded, eyes stinging with the answer she didn't want to hear, and then they were gone. Micah lingered at the window long after their car had disappeared down the street. His arms were crossed, his posture thoughtful, not tense. He didn't speak until the last of the dust had settled. "They don't feel like strangers," he said quietly, "but they don't feel like family either." I stepped beside him, watched the emptiness of the road with him. "That's because blood is just biology," I murmured. "Family is what you survive with." He turned to me then. "Did it ever get easier, carrying all that pain?" My breath caught a little. I thought about late nights in Ruth's kitchen, the taste of cold leftover stew, the sound of bills stacking higher than hope. I thought about Derek's hand on mine the night he proposed, about Micah's first day of kindergarten when he didn't look back, not even once. I thought about waking up each morning with more resolve than rest. "No," I said truthfully, "but it made me stronger than I ever knew I could be." Micah nodded slowly. "I want to know more. About who you were, who you had to become." His words weren't invasive. They were a gift. He wasn't asking to unearth the past out of curiosity. He was asking to honor it. So I told him. That night, with Ruth snoring in the recliner and Derek dozing in the armchair with a book on his chest, I told Micah the truth. Not just the timeline, but the texture of it, the fear, the nights I cried so hard I thought I'd go deaf, the anger, the pride, the way his first laugh in the hospital room had felt like church bells ringing in my chest. He listened without interrupting, like the scientist he was, gathering data to better understand the miracle in front of him. When I finished, he didn't hug me right away. He just whispered, "You didn't just raise a doctor, Mom. You raised a witness." I smiled then, tired but at peace. That's all I ever wanted. Later, when the house was quiet again, I stood alone on the porch. The wind had picked up, stirring the trees that lined Ruth's garden. The sky above Maple Hollow was endless and dark, dotted with stars that hadn't changed in 20 years, even though I had. I closed my eyes and let the air wash over me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had something to prove. I had my son. I had my home. I had survived the kind of abandonment that should have broken me. And now, I had boundaries, not to keep people out, but to protect everything I had fought like hell to build. People think the worst kind of pain is being left behind, and for a while I believed that too. But I've learned something far quieter, far sharper. The worst pain is being erased, told that your worth ends where someone else's comfort begins, that your voice doesn't matter, that your love is conditional, disposable. They tried to erase me. My own parents, the boy who once promised forever, even the town in its small, suffocating way, tried to reduce me to a cautionary tale. But I didn't disappear. I endured, and in that endurance, I built something stronger than any apology could ever replace. A home, a son, a life where love isn't withheld like a privilege, but given like breath, freely, fully, without fear. Forgiveness? It's not a door I owe anyone. It's a garden I choose to tend on my own terms with my own hands. And sometimes it stays locked, not out of cruelty, but out of self-respect. You don't need a perfect past to deserve peace. You don't need blood to define family. What you need is someone who shows up, in the hard moments, in the silent ones, in the ones no one claps for. I used to chase the version of me they loved. Quiet, compliant, clean. But the woman I am now, she's fierce, she's flawed, she's full, and she is not going anywhere. So if you've ever been cast out, if you've ever had to rebuild from the ashes of someone else's shame, remember this. Your story isn't over. It's just yours now. And that's the most powerful kind of ending there is. The first time I saw them on our porch, without calling, without texting, without even knocking, I should have known this house wasn't truly ours yet. Judith smiled like she owned the sky above it, and Douglas walked in like the ground was his. That was day 2, not even 48 hours after Elliot and I moved into our new place in Boulder. It was supposed to be our beginning, a soft reset after a messy wedding season, long debates about cities, and a rented apartment above a motorcycle garage that never quite felt like home. This 3-bedroom, mid-century fixer-upper was our chance to breathe. Quiet, clean, ours. Or so I thought. Judith didn't even wait for me to speak. She walked straight past the threshold, her eyes scanning every inch of the living room like she was checking in on a guest suite. "We brought you a little something," she said, pressing a bottle of cheap Cabernet into my hand. "Something for the first night." Douglas followed, clutching a folded stack of papers, some maintenance tips he printed off from a home blog. I hadn't asked. I didn't need them. But that was the Renshaw way. Assume incompetence, mask it as love. I tried to stay polite, smiled, nodded. I even thanked them. But when Judith plopped herself onto the couch like it was a throne and crossed her legs with ease, I felt the shift. The air tensed. "So," she said casually, "when do we get our spare key?" I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" Douglas chuckled like I'd asked if water was wet. "Oh, sweetheart, of course we need one. You never know what could happen." "In case of what exactly?" I asked, voice even, heart already pounding. Judith leaned forward, all saccharine and scrutiny. "Well, what if something goes wrong while you two are at work? What if we need to water the plants or check on things? Just little stuff, really. You know, for emergencies." But there was no emergency. No plants that needed watering. No request for help. This wasn't kindness, this was control. I turned toward Elliot, my husband, my partner, the man who, not long ago, had promised to protect me, to stand beside me, to build a life with me. He didn't look at me. He nodded instead. "Yeah, that makes sense." Then he pulled the extra key from the dish by the door and handed it to his mother. I felt something snap inside me. Something quiet, like a rubber band, pulled too far. I smiled. Too sweetly. "Of course," I said. "You're absolutely right." My hand itched to snatch the key back, to say no, to shout, but I didn't. Not yet. Because this wasn't a fight I was going to win in that moment. Not with Elliot still caught in their gravity. Not with Judith staring at me, like a queen bestowing favor. I nodded once more. "It's good to know we have backup." That night, while Elliot showered, I sat at the kitchen table staring at that key dish. The one that was now 1 copy lighter. The weight of it wasn't just metal. It was history, habit, legacy. Elliot had grown up in a house where Judith decided what meals were cooked, where Douglas inspected report cards like military files. Elliot never rebelled. He just adapted. I'd seen it in subtle ways, his hesitance to disagree, his need to ask for permission instead of forgiveness. He wasn't weak. He was trained, but I wasn't. So I began to plan. By morning, I'd already bought a secondary lock, hotel-style, thick, steel, the kind that could only be latched from the inside. By lunch, I was reviewing indoor camera systems. And by nightfall, I had texted someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Uncle Frank. He replied within minutes, "I'll bring my duffel." This wasn't just about a key. This was about setting the tone for the rest of my marriage, for my home, my life. And if I had to teach them what the word boundaries meant, I was ready. I just needed 1 week. I played my role to perfection, the agreeable daughter-in-law, the sweet, understanding newlywed. For the next 7 days, I said all the right things. I thanked Judith for watching over us. I laughed when Douglas made passive-aggressive jokes about homeownership. I even said things like, "It's actually kind of comforting knowing you two are nearby." Judith beamed. Douglas smirked. Elliot relaxed. That was the part that hurt the most. But while they floated in the illusion of control, I was working. Quietly, relentlessly. Step 1, I installed the secondary lock. A heavy-duty hotel-style latch positioned discreetly at the top of the door, out of sight unless you were looking for it, only accessible from the inside. Elliot noticed, of course. "You really think we need that?" he asked. I just smiled. "It's bolder. You never know." Step 2. I set up the motion-activated security camera in the living room. It was sleek, tucked behind a bookshelf connected to my phone. Every movement, every sound, every intrusion sent straight to me. Step 3. Frank. Frank Delaney wasn't technically family. He was my mom's cousin, once removed. Former Boulder PD. Retired early after an on-the-job injury. He ran a private security firm now, but still had that look, broad shoulders, buzz cut, sharp eyes that had seen too much. He was also the only person I knew who could go toe-to-toe with someone like Douglas and enjoy it. When I called, I didn't even have to explain. Just said, "It's about a boundary that doesn't exist." And he said, "When do I move in?" We made it legal. I drew up a short-term sublease and filed it with the landlord, who didn't bat an eye. Frank would stay 1 week. Enough time to see if Douglas and Judith truly believed their key gave them full access. Elliot, of course, wasn't told. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I didn't trust his conditioning. Not yet. I didn't have to wait long. It was Tuesday morning, 10:41 a.m. I was at the office when my phone buzzed. Motion detected, living room. I opened the feed. There they were. Douglas was already in the kitchen, opening cabinets, inspecting drawers like he was checking for contraband. Judith was smoothing the throw blanket on the couch, then casually walking toward the hallway like she owned it. I watched, jaw tight, heart pounding, as she stepped into our bedroom. Seconds later, she reappeared with a basket of clean laundry and started folding it. My stomach turned, not out of shame, out of fury. The audacity, the entitlement. This wasn't help. This wasn't love. This was judgment disguised as caretaking. Supervision dressed as generosity. They didn't think they were doing anything wrong because in their world, I wasn't really an adult. I was just the wife. I watched as Douglas walked back to the door, ready to leave. He turned the knob. Nothing. He turned it again. Still locked. Judith joined him, confused. Douglas rattled the handle harder, then looked up and saw it, the extra lock. He blinked, pulled harder. Judith's face paled, and that's when the basement door creaked open. Frank stepped into the room like he'd been waiting for this moment all his life. 6'2", worn denim, black t-shirt stretched over broad shoulders, his arms tattooed in ink he designed himself. He cracked his knuckles, leaned against the wall, and smiled like a lion who just found 2 confused deer in his den. "Well," he said, "look who let themselves in." Judith gasped, stumbling backward. Douglas puffed up. "Who the hell are you?" Frank didn't flinch. "I live here." "You most certainly do not," Judith stammered. Frank reached into his back pocket, pulled out a folded document, and held it up like a badge. "Signed sublease. Registered with the landlord. You just broke into an occupied residence." Douglas took a step forward, but his voice cracked. "This is my son's house." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Not this week it isn't." And I watched it all from my desk. Calm, cold, completely in control. The trap had snapped shut, and they never even saw it coming. Frank didn't move from the wall. He didn't have to. His presence was enough to turn the air sharp. Douglas was fuming now, his cheeks blotchy with heat, his fists clenched at his sides. "You're trespassing," he barked, voice hoarse with disbelief. "Get out of our house." Frank actually chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sounded more amused than threatened. "Your house," he repeated, raising one thick eyebrow. Then he calmly unfolded the lease again, slower this time, savoring every second like a man peeling the skin off someone else's lie. "Signed, notarized, filed. You can call the landlord if you like, but I'd suggest doing it from outside." Judith clutched Douglas's arm, her voice trembling. "Douglas, let's just go, please." But Douglas wasn't finished. "Where's Claire?" he demanded, ignoring her. "She'll explain this. She's not involved in this ridiculous game." Frank leaned back, crossed his arms. "She's at work, where normal people are on a Tuesday morning." That was when my phone rang. "Incoming call, Elliot." I took a breath before answering. "Hey," I said casually. "What the hell is going on?" he blurted out before I could say anything else. "My parents just called. They said there's some guy in the house claiming he lives there." I smiled, staring at my screen. "Really? Maybe you should ask them what they were doing inside our house in the first place." Silence, then a soft, almost broken whisper. "Claire, did you do something?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He hung up. Back at the house, Frank stayed cool. Douglas was pacing now, muttering under his breath. Judith kept darting glances toward the door like she was hoping someone, maybe Elliot, would appear and rescue them. Frank, meanwhile, poured himself a glass of water from the kitchen, took a slow sip, and said, "You know, if you wanted to borrow sugar, there's a better way to ask." They didn't laugh. It took another 10 minutes before I walked in. I took my time getting there. I parked 2 houses down, walked up the driveway deliberately, keys jingling in my pocket. When I opened the door and stepped inside, the room felt electrified. Judith was perched on the edge of the couch like she'd been caught stealing from a church. Douglas stood by the door, his eyes sharp dark. Frank nodded at me once, the only greeting I needed. "Hey, babe," I said cheerfully, dropping my bag on the counter. "What's going on?" Douglas stepped forward, shaking the lease in my face. "This is a joke," he snapped. This is a lie. You're playing games." I tilted my head, calm as ever. Funny, the landlord didn't think so. Judith finally stood up, her voice sharp and shaking. "You think this is cute? Locking us in here like criminals? This little stunt of yours? You've gone too far." I folded my arms. "Too far? You mean like walking into our house without permission? Going through my kitchen drawers? Folding my laundry?" Douglas's voice dropped low and dangerous. "We have a key." Frank snorted. "Yeah, and look how well that worked out." At that, Elliot finally walked through the door. He stopped cold. The whole room froze. His eyes darted from me to his parents, to Frank. He looked like a man stepping into a burning building, knowing the fire started long before he got there. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. Judith rushed to him, grabbing his hands, her voice laced with betrayal. "Elliot, did you know about this?" Her eyes searched his face like she could pull truth out of hesitation. He froze. She gasped. "You did," she breathed. "You let her do this?" Elliot rubbed his face, exhausted. "Mom." But Douglas had reached his limit. "I want the key back," he barked. "Right now." I didn't flinch. "No, we're your family," he hissed. "We have a right to be here." I actually laughed. "Do you hear yourself? You don't live here. You don't pay the mortgage. You don't get a say." Douglas took a step closer. "You're making a big mistake." Frank cracked his knuckles. "I'd love to see how that plays out." Douglas turned toward him, furious. You shut your mouth, but Frank just grinned. That slow, dangerous kind of grin that makes grown men reconsider. "I don't think I will." Judith tugged his arm. "Let's just go." Douglas wouldn't budge. His voice dropped to a cold, venom-laced promise. "You're going to regret this." I met his gaze without blinking. "No, Douglas, you are." and I meant every word. That night, the silence between us was almost louder than the shouting earlier. Elliot and I sat on the couch like strangers. He stared at the floor, elbows on knees, fingers laced together so tightly they were turning white. The only sound was the soft hum of the fridge and the distant creak of the wind moving through the pine trees outside. I waited, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I wanted to hear what he would say first. Finally, he spoke. "So, are they going to hate you forever now?" I exhaled slowly. "Probably." He nodded, eyes still fixed on the floor. "I really screwed up, huh?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted to. God, I wanted to scream. To shake him and ask how he could hand over a key to people who had never once respected me. But instead I said, "You gave them a key to our house," without even asking me. He flinched just a little. You thought what?" I cut in, keeping my tone low. That they'd respect the boundary? That they'd only come in when it was convenient? You know them better than that, Elliot. You grew up with them. He rubbed his temples. "I get it now. Okay, I messed up. I really thought they just wanted to help." "No, they wanted control," I said quietly. "And you handed it to them." He looked up at me, and for the first time that day I saw it, shame. Real, raw shame. Not the kind that fades with an apology, but the kind that lingers. The kind that forces you to question everything you've been taught about love, family, obedience. "We're changing the locks," I said. He didn't argue, just nodded. Over the next few days, things went quiet. No calls. No surprise visits. I almost let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd finally understood. That the message had landed. But deep down, I knew better. People like Douglas and Judith didn't back down. They regrouped. They recalculated. And sure enough, Friday morning, my phone rang. It was our landlord. "Hey," he said, voice unusually stiff. "I just got a strange call from some people claiming to be your in-laws." I felt my stomach drop. "What kind of call?" "They were fishing, asking if there was any way to terminate your lease early." I went cold. "They what?" "They offered to pay out the remainder of your contract. In full. Said they'd like to take over the unit themselves." I had to grip the edge of the kitchen counter to steady myself. "Did they say why?" He hesitated. Something about restoring the house to the right hands. I didn't get the full picture. But don't worry. I told them no way in hell. I hung up and stared at the wall, vision blurring with disbelief. This wasn't about concern. It wasn't about parenting. This was war. They had actually tried to evict us from our own home, as if I were some unwanted tenant in a life they believed belonged solely to their son. I didn't tell Elliot. Not yet. Not because I was hiding it, but because I wasn't sure he was strong enough to face the truth. Not all at once. He was still wading through years of guilt, shame, and invisible chains. He had finally stood beside me once. But could he do it again if the war escalated? So I made a decision. I got in my car, drove straight to Douglas and Judith's house, and rang the doorbell like I belonged there. Judith answered, wearing a surprised smile that quickly curdled when she saw it was me, not her son. "Oh," she said stiffly, "we weren't expecting you." "No, is Milat." I figured. I stepped inside before she could say another word. Douglas was in the living room, beer in hand, legs kicked up like he didn't have a care in the world. He barely looked up. "What do you want?" he grunted. I sat down across from him, folded my hands neatly and said it plain. "I know what you did." Judith stiffened behind me. "Excuse me." "You tried to get us evicted." Douglas slowly set his beer down. "I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen. "Should I put the landlord on speaker?" Silence. Then Douglas had the audacity to smirk. "All right," he said, leaning forward. "Let's say we did." I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I let his smirk sit in the air like smoke from a slow-burning fire. Judith gasped beside him. "Douglas," she hissed, What are you saying? He waved her off like her panic was a fly. She's not stupid, Judy. She already knows. Might as well own it. His voice was so casual, so calm, it made my skin crawl. Like trying to ruin your son's life was just Tuesday. So what was the plan? I asked, leaning back slightly. Get us evicted, take over the lease, move in, and pretend nothing happened. Douglas tilted his head. We just wanted to be closer to our son. I let out a short, bitter laugh. No, you wanted control. You always have. You didn't care if it wrecked his marriage, his mental health, or his stability, as long as he stayed small enough for you to manage. Judith's hands wrung together, trembling. Claire, you're twisting this. We were just trying to help. Elliot's always needed a little extra guidance. He's not 12, I snapped. He's a grown man with a home and a wife, and you're treating him like a broken appliance that needs checking every week. Douglas's face hardened. We raised him. He wouldn't even have that house without us. No, I said, voice ice cold. He wouldn't have a lifetime of self-doubt without you. He wouldn't freeze every time someone asks him to make a decision. He wouldn't apologize for existing in his own space. Judith's lips parted in shock, but I wasn't done. You didn't raise a man. You raised an obedient echo. Douglas stood abruptly, the coffee table rattling beneath his knee. Watch your mouth. I rose to match him. No, you watch yours. If you ever, and I mean ever, pull something like this again, I will make sure you regret it. Not just in this neighborhood. Not just with the landlord. I will expose you for what you are, a manipulative, abusive father who can't let go of the one person he thinks he owns. Judith's voice cracked. Are you threatening us? I smiled, but it wasn't warm. Oh, Judith, I haven't even started. And then I walked out, not one step faster than I needed to. I wanted them to watch me leave. I wanted them to know, truly know, that they weren't untouchable anymore. For a while, I thought that might be enough. The silence that followed was almost hopeful. No calls, no emails, no unexpected cars parked across the street. I started sleeping better. Elliot did too. He didn't ask where I went that day, and I didn't offer. But something shifted in the way he looked at me, like he saw a line drawn behind my eyes, and realized I was the one willing to defend both of us when he couldn't. But the peace didn't last. It started small. A missing Amazon package. A trash bin knocked over in the middle of the night. Minor things. Things you could explain away. Until one night, Elliot and I were curled up on the couch watching reruns, the lights low, the curtains half drawn, and we heard it. A scraping sound. Metallic. Slow. Coming from the front porch. Elliot muted the TV, eyes narrowing. Did you hear that? I nodded, already moving toward the door. He peeked through the peephole and stiffened. What is it? I whispered. His voice was flat. Cold. My dad. I looked through the peephole myself. Douglas stood on our porch, holding something in his hand. A key. Not just any key, one of the old ones. The ones we had changed. He turned it in the lock, nothing. Again, still nothing. Then he pounded on the door with his fist. Open the damn door. Elliot stood frozen. His face wasn't anger or fear. It was grief. I pulled out my phone and hit record. Douglas, I said through the door, voice calm, controlled, firm. You need to leave. This is my son's house, he yelled. No, I said. It's not. Not anymore. And just when I thought the moment couldn't get more surreal, Judith's voice rang out from the side of the house. Elliot, sweetheart, she pleaded, her voice syrupy with desperation. Just open the door so we can talk. But Elliot didn't move, and for the first time, I think he realized this wasn't a family visit. This was a siege. Elliot's breath came shallow and fast. He was staring through the peephole, but he wasn't really seeing. Not his father, not the porch. Just a lifetime of commands that sounded like concern. 100 small decisions he never got to make. A boy raised on approval like oxygen, suddenly realizing he didn't need to keep breathing in poison. Elliot, I whispered. What do you want to do? He didn't answer. Douglas banged on the door again, harder this time. You are making a huge mistake. His voice cracked with fury. Then the motion sensor lights in the backyard flicked on. I turned to the back window, just in time to see a shadow move near the fence. Someone was back there. My body moved before my brain caught up. I grabbed my phone and called 911. Stay inside, the dispatcher said. Officers are on their way. Douglas was still hammering the door. Open up. You hear me? You open this damn door right now. I know you're in there. Judith was crying now, her voice floating in from the side window. Elliot, please. You don't mean this. You can't let her do this to us. I saw Elliot blink hard, his whole body tensed like a coiled wire ready to snap. I reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. A minute later, red and blue lights washed over the front of the house. The banging stopped. I opened the door slowly, holding my phone in one hand, still recording. The two officers stepped forward. One tall and serious, the other younger but alert. Douglas turned toward them, arms raised like he was the victim. This is just a misunderstanding, he said quickly. I'm his father. We're trying to talk to our son. That's all. One of the officers looked at Elliot. Sir, do you know these individuals? Elliot's jaw worked silently for a moment. His eyes flicked from me to Douglas, to Judith's tear-streaked face. And then he exhaled. They're my parents, he said slowly, and they're trespassing. Judith gasped. Douglas's face drained of color, his mouth slack in disbelief. The younger officer stepped forward. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you both to step away from the property. Douglas didn't move. His hands curled into fists. You think you're doing the right thing, he said to Elliot, voice low and dangerous. But you're going to wake up one day and realize she took everything from you. Elliot didn't speak, just looked at the officers. Judith stumbled toward the porch, her hands clasped together like in prayer. Elliot, honey, please don't let her take you away from us. You're our son. You'll always be. But Elliot cut her off. Quietly, firmly. She didn't take anything. His voice cracked, but not from weakness, from resolve. You did that. You did that when you stopped seeing me as a person and started treating me like an extension of your will. That's when Douglas snapped. You're not my son. He spat the words like they burned his throat. Then he turned sharply and stormed down the porch. Judith stayed frozen for a moment, sobbing silently before chasing after him. They didn't look back. The officers waited until they disappeared into the dark, then turned to us. Do you want to press charges? Elliot shook his head. Not tonight. We closed the door. The silence afterward felt like a cavern, wide, hollow, echoing with everything that had just happened. Elliot sat down slowly on the couch, his head in his hands. I didn't say anything. I just sat beside him. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, voice barely above a whisper, he said, They hate me now. I swallowed hard. Maybe. No, he said, shaking his head. They do. My dad, he meant it. I saw it in his face. I didn't deny it. Yeah, he did. His hands balled into fists. I don't know how to feel. I reached for him again, this time not just to offer comfort, but to anchor him. I know. He looked at me with tears swimming in his eyes, then dropped his head onto my shoulder like a child who finally stopped pretending everything was fine. I think I always knew this was coming. I didn't speak, because deep down, I did too. The days that followed felt strange. Not quiet, because quiet had peace in it, but hollow, like the aftermath of a storm that no one really believed would come. Elliot didn't talk much. He moved slower, like every step had to push against a lifetime of obedience. I gave him space. I made tea. I kept the lights soft and the house warm. I didn't say, You did the right thing. I didn't need to. Some truths don't need repetition, they just need time to settle. And then, 5 days after that night, it happened. Elliot was checking his email over breakfast. I was pouring coffee when I heard his breath catch. I turned. "What is it?" He didn't speak, just turned the screen toward me. It was from a law office. Subject: cease and desist interference in parental relationship. The letter was formal. Cold. Worded with the sterile precision of people who knew they had already lost in real life, so they turned to paper to try and reclaim control. They're demanding that I restore communication to its natural and expected state, Elliot read aloud. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even surprised. It was just numb. I scanned the page. They had cited emotional alienation, intentional separation, and withholding of familial affection. It was absurd, ridiculous even, but underneath the legal jargon, I saw it for what it was. Desperation. "They're trying to legally force you to talk to them," I murmured. Elliot laughed, short and dry. "Yeah, looks like it." He leaned back in his chair and stared at the screen like it held the final puzzle piece of something he had been trying to understand his whole life. And maybe it did, because after a long pause he smiled. Not a big smile, not one for me, just a small, inward curve of the mouth, like something had finally clicked into place. "They're desperate," he said quietly. I tilted my head. "You're sure?" He nodded. "Yeah, I'm sure." And then, without another word, he opened a blank email, typed a single line, and hit send. "Do not contact us again." We blocked everything after that. Emails, numbers, social media accounts. Judith tried with fake names. Douglas sent a Christmas card addressed to E. Renshaw and housemate. It went straight into the trash, but the attempt slowed. Eventually they stopped, and in that stillness we healed. Not all at once. Not cleanly. Some nights, Elliot would wake up drenched in sweat, murmuring fragments of old memories. Some days he'd stare too long at a photo of him as a child in Judith's arms, trying to reconcile what was real and what was rehearsed. But time has a way of softening even the deepest scars if you stop picking at them. One evening, weeks later, we sat on the porch. The sky was pink with dusk. The neighborhood hushed in that golden lull before dinner. Elliot held a mug of tea in both hands. His shoulders weren't hunched anymore. "I feel free," he said softly. I turned to look at him. "You are." He let out a long breath, then with the faintest laugh added, "So, can we invite Uncle Frank over? I think he's earned a beer." I smiled, finally letting myself exhale the fear I hadn't even realized I was holding. That night, we didn't talk about trauma. We didn't dissect the past. We just sat, two people who had chosen each other, against the odds, against the expectations, against the weight of inherited guilt. Sometimes people say family is forever, but that's not true. Real family doesn't chain you. Real family doesn't punish you for growing. Real family doesn't make you feel like you owe them your life. Sometimes the bravest, kindest, most loving thing you can do is walk away and never look back.